Hello there, you're watching Breaking Views on NDTV. I'm Maha Siddiqui. The nuclear rhetoric in the Russia-Ukraine war is getting shriller. Russia has claimed, though so far without any evidence, that Ukraine is developing a dirty bomb, a bomb laced with radioactive and chemical elements. The NATO has called the claim absurd. The US has called it a typical disinformation exercise by Kremlin. But Russia held nuclear drills in the shadow of these claims. Meant as a deterrent, as per Moscow, the exercise involving multiple practice launches of ballistic and cruise missiles. This is not the first time that the N word has emerged in the current war. On two occasions in September, President Putin alluded to nuclear weapons usage, at one point saying that it was US that had set the precedent. But with 8 months into the war and some reverses for Russia, and on the other hand, winter approaching, threatening to turn Europe cold, are both sides desperate? How real is the threat of escalation? That's our discussion this evening on Breaking Views. But before I introduce our panelists, let me bring in the EU Ambassador to India, Ugo Astuto. Many thanks, Ambassador, for speaking to us. Russia claims that Ukraine is developing a dirty bomb and this will end up pulling NATO into the conflict. How would you respond to these claims, sir?
Well, let me be very blunt here. These claims have no credibility whatsoever. We have seen that before. We have seen actually a long track record of disinformation and false allegation. And the latest claim about Ukraine allegedly preparing a dirty bomb is no exception to this pattern. It actually looks as a possible pretext for Moscow for further escalation in a war which Russia is clearly losing. And incidentally, Ukraine has called on the UN to go and witness directly that such allegations are totally fabricated. So this is part of a now traditional tactic from the Kremlin to use propaganda to blame others, and Kiev in particular for what Russia might be thinking of doing. And actually, as of now, Russia is already risking a potential nuclear disaster with its totally reckless occupation of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power station in Ukraine.
So, Ambassador, what do these claims from Russia indicate then, if you are suggesting that these are false?
Well, in my opinion, this indicates that the Russian leadership is starting to understand that they are losing the war. On the battlefield, we see Ukrainian forces gaining ground. On the domestic front, we see thousands of young, educated Russians fleeing their home country to escape the draft for an unjust war. Internationally, we have seen 143 members of the UN General Assembly voting in favor of the resolution to preserve the territorial integrity of Ukraine and defending the UN Charter against Russia's aggression. And finally, economically, where the sanctions are starting to bite. So I think this is an evidence of the fact that it's a growing awareness in Russia that the war is being lost.
But Ambassador, the nuclear rhetoric is very worrying. How and who will send a message for piping this down?
I agree with you in the sense that together with NATO, we have been consistent in asking Russia to stop its provocations, to drop its irresponsible claims, its innuendos about the possible use of nuclear power, and stop looking at pretext for escalation. So I think this unprovoked and unjustified aggression against Ukraine has lasted already for too long. with devastating consequences over the civilian population. And I'm afraid mounting evidence of war crimes being committed by Russian forces on Ukrainian soil. So it's definitely time for Russia to stop this war. And we see as we speak Russian forces targeting civilian infrastructure, resorting to terror tactics in a way, and blackmail. So this will not work. And the EU stands with Ukraine at this moment of need.
My final question, Ambassador. India's defense minister yesterday in the conversation with his Russian counterpart stressed that nuclear option should not be resorted to at any cost. What is the expectation from India as it maintains a neutral position, and the Indian External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar is now travelling to Moscow next month?
Well, I think it's very important that India's defense minister has reiterated to his Russian counterpart that the nuclear option is a no-go. The prospect of the use of nuclear weapons goes against the basic tenets of humanity, the minister said, and it's absolutely true. So the voice of India is a very influential voice on the world scene. It's crucial that this message is passed loud and clear. So Russia must stop its aggression and stop provocations.
Many thanks, Ambassador Suto, for speaking with NDTV. Let me now open up this discussion. Our panelists have joined us. Brahmachalani, strategic affairs expert; Fred Weir, Russian affairs expert, Russian correspondent for Boston-based daily The Christian Science Monitor; former diplomat Vishnu Prakash; Olena Tregab, former director of Ministry of Economy, Ukraine; and we'll also be joined by Oleksiy Goncharenko, Member of Parliament from Ukraine, but shortly. Let me first go across to Fred Weir. Fred, NATO says that they are concerned because Russia accuses others of what they intend to do themselves. There is a pattern, they say. Would you say this assessment seems accurate? Should we be worried?
I honestly don't know what Russians are talking about. I recognize that they've done this before. Early in the war, there was all these accusations about biological warfare laboratories in Ukraine. Lots of supposed documentation presented. The Russians seem to take it very, very seriously. Nobody else did, and I'm not qualified to judge these things. And the same here, although they're not presenting evidence, they seem to sound very convinced. They had special phone calls with several defense ministers over this, and I just can't say what it means, but it's not good. In whatever is going on, whatever in the minds of the Russians is going on, spells fresh escalations and greater uncertainty for the world as this conflict continues and may be going out of control.
Olena Tregab, would Russia, which is a P5 member, make such a big and serious claim without any evidence at all? Will they not be answerable for making such accusations against Ukraine if not true?
I don't know if they...
Of course not, because we saw, do you remember what Russia was saying before February 24? They were saying that they will not attack and invade Ukraine. What are they doing right now? They are invading Ukraine. Russia basically does not, lost completely credibility on the international stage, and I think right now for them, they are just looking for more and more ideas how to blackmail the world, how to basically ruin the unity to stand with Ukraine, how to scare Europeans. And they come up with this idea. They were saying they may blow up at them. Then now this dirty bomb, all these things, there is absolutely zero evidence. There's zero. So there's nothing to discuss here. It's just a threat. It's just a bluff to basically give Putin some break to do their ceasefire so that he can keep the territory that he already occupied, rebuild his army, and try to invade Ukraine again, because they desperately want right now some break. So that's how Ukrainians view this blackmail.
Brahmachalani, Olena saying this is a bluff. The EU ambassador just said that Russia's claim indicates that they are losing. As a commentator, is that even close to what is being witnessed on the ground currently?
Maha, first, it's not just Russia that is conducting nuclear drills at present. Even NATO is conducting nuclear drills.
That's right.
And the risks of an accidental nuclear exchange between the US and Russia can no longer be discounted. The world is at a crossroads today, and the risks of escalation from this war are growing. Let's be clear on one other thing, that this current international crisis represents the most dangerous period since the end of the Cold War. And the UN Secretary General rightly warned of colossal global dysfunction. The specter of global dysfunction seems real. What is most troubling is that dialogue and diplomacy have become dirty words in the present conflict. This is apparent from the fact that the liberal Congressional Progressive Caucus in the US was forced this week to retract its letter to the President, Joe Biden. The letter sought a rapid end to the Ukraine conflict through diplomacy. And the retraction came after other members of the US Democratic Party accused this caucus of undermining US policy as well as support for Kyiv through that letter. The letter actually was very reasonable, in very logical way, in reasonable way. It called for a proactive diplomatic push for a ceasefire, saying a extended war is neither an American or Ukrainian interest. The irony is that, as the letter points out, that Biden himself had earlier acknowledged that there's going to have to be a negotiated settlement, and that Zelensky had said in May that the war will only definitely be ended through diplomacy. So without diplomacy, without dialogue, there is no way forward. There's no way to diffuse these tensions.
But last time around, we heard President Putin say that they are ready for diplomacy, but Ukraine isn't. This was the conversation he had with Prime Minister Modi in Samarkand, when the Prime Minister had said that this is not the era of war. Ambassador Vishnu Prakash, the call to India yesterday from the Russian Defense Minister about the possibility of the use of dirty bomb came as Russia had started its own nuclear drills. How do you read the call and the timing?
Maha, greetings. The fact is that both sides are talking peace but waging war. There is a huge gap between what is being said and what is being done. The ease with which, the casualness with which the N word is being used is absolutely alarming. And in this fog of war, each side is trying to gain an advantage over the other, provoking the other. There is a brinkmanship going on, and it almost seems that they are sleepwalking into an escalatory mode. So that is how it looks like at the moment. It would seem that after 8 months of conflict, and where they have had a lot of setbacks, Russians should be willing, or there are indications that they are willing to talk about a ceasefire, but the West is determined to humiliate Russia, rub their nose into the ground, and I don't know whether they are willing to agree. The point is that even if the countries try to mediate, it will only happen when the sides are exhausted or they agree. So at the moment, things are not looking too good. In fact, they are looking every day. Things seem to be deteriorating further. And I hope people can step back and get back to the negotiating table, because that is the only way forward, something that India has been again and again reiterating.
Fred, we saw the annexation exercise coming when Russia suffered some reverses. Are the reverses making Russia perhaps desperate, just like the approaching of winter may make Europe desperate in this situation too?
The reverses had the effect of stimulating the hawkish voices in Russia. Putin declared this partial mobilization. They switched their tactics to bombing infrastructure. The electrical grid in Ukraine has been decimated now. That's a whole new tactics. They appointed one very hawkish general to command the entire operation. I think that they've also stabilized the lines. Ukrainian offensives, though they were very successful in September, have clearly petered out. And it's probable now that the mud season has arrived when troops will find it difficult to move except on paved roads until, say, late December, January. Probably the lines are stabilized now. The Russian mobilization, for all of its problems and its insanities, seems to be working. Though hundreds of thousands of Russians left the country, hundreds of thousands have shown up at the recruitment centers and been inducted into the army. It's a very, very Russian thing. But it does seem that not only the political leadership, but the society is doubling down on the war. So I fear that that the Russians will come back, double the forces in Ukraine, and by January we'll be looking at a big escalation of the war.
And Olena, could they also press the gas, considering that Russia knows that it has and it can use oil and gas as a leveraging factor over here? After all, Europe will face a tough winter this time around. Could that make the situation desperate even for the West?
I don't think so. I think the West is united. Democracies of the world, except for India, stand with Ukraine. And I think here India should stop trading with Russia, with Russian resources. And India should tell to Russia to deoccupy Ukrainian territory and have a peace treaty. Exactly, Ukrainians want that. But, when you comment here that basically not humiliate Russia, who is humiliating Russia? Is anybody trying to take any Russian land or invade Russia? No. You cannot trade with Ukrainian land and with lives of Ukrainian people. Ukrainian people will be standing and defending their motherland. So basically, right now, the voice of India is very important if you don't want escalation, if you don't want these terrible nuclear threats to in any way to be realized. So this is the time, not to wait for January, but change your policy today.
Ambassador Vishnu Prakash, two voices here, one from Ukraine, the other from the EU, both saying that India has a strong voice in this scenario and it should press upon Russia even further that this war should end. India has already made certain attempts. Do you think that Russia is paying heed to those?
Well, India has made many attempts. Prime Minister Modi has been speaking to President Putin, and also in Uzbekistan, Prime Minister mentioned publicly that this is not the era of war. On the 8th of November, External Affairs Minister Jaishankar is going to Moscow. India has been far from encouraging it. India has made it very clear that territorial integrity has to be respected. We have been unequivocal that this conflict has to end, and not end today, but yesterday. The point is that unless the sides agree, Moscow agrees, Washington agrees, conflict will not stop. And Ukraine is suffering. So Ukraine is suffering, people are dying, destruction is happening. So it is from that token that one has been saying that, it is about time that sides get back to the negotiating table instead of trying to challenge each other, trying to provoke each other, because that will only lead to further escalation and damage.
Brahmachalani, the world is already suffering after the COVID-19 pandemic, then the Ukraine war. what could be the consequences of any further nuclear threat perception escalation?
Well, first, let me clarify two facts. First, much of the non-Western world, including all the leading non-Western democracies, have taken an independent, neutral stance on this conflict. And in the neutral category of nations are Israel, a very close ally of America, and Turkey, a NATO member. So much of the world is neutral in this conflict. Second, even though we talk about Russian military reverses, and there have been some important Russian military reverses, let's not forget that Russia today controls nearly 20% of Ukraine's territory. And Ukraine is a large country. In fact, it's the largest country located entirely within Europe. It's 1.7 times larger than Germany, the largest country in Western Europe. So nearly 20% of Ukrainian territory in Russian control is a vast swath of territory under Russian control. And the longer this war lasts, the less likely Russia will withdraw from the occupied territories, which it has already annexed formally. Also, looking ahead, I think no winner is likely to emerge from this war. There'll be only losers. Ukraine will face increasing devastation. Russia will be a loser. Europe is increasingly burdened by the economic and geopolitical fallout from the war. And ultimately, even the US is going to be a loser. Look at the hyperinflation in the US, the specter of recession in the US. But most importantly, it is the poorer countries that are bearing the brunt from the war's fallout. And these nuclear tensions and the nuclear threats and the escalation by both sides, including by Russia as well as the US, sending in more and more sophisticated weapons, this bodes ill. It's clear that neither side at the moment is interested in peace. Unfortunately, we will have to deal with the consequences of this war for months to come. But this war is reshaping international geopolitics. It's reshaping energy markets. It's reshaping, in fact, it's creating a new global divide that's going to have an important bearing on international security. Is going to further strengthen the gridlock in the UN Security Council, make it more difficult for the international community to look forward and deal with international challenges in a cooperative manner.
Okay. Final 2 minutes left, I think, so I'll go to Fred, where as Fred, Olena is suggesting that this N word being used is a bluff by Russia. Do you think it really is a bluff, considering that Russia is a P5 member and understands perhaps the responsibility that it has, and we all know what the consequences of nuclear weapon usage are?
Yes, you know, I as a journalist keep asking Russian officials, Russian strategic experts, what on earth they are talking about, because it is so destabilizing and unnerving for the whole world to hear this kind of talk. And reassuring thing that people say is that Russia is warning the West not to cross its red lines, not to get directly involved in the Ukraine war, that they have no intention of using nuclear weapons in the war, that they have many, many other military options to deploy, and that their words are being misconstrued. I don't know of any Russians in official positions or responsible experts who say otherwise. But you just never know. The talk is out there, the speculation is rife, and we know that things like this can get out of hand, and so we have every reason to be worried.
And we just hope they don't. Many thanks to all 4 of our panelists for joining us here on the discussion this evening. With that, we're taking a very quick break. News and updates will continue. Stay with us.